On February 14, 2022, a man was found dead under mysterious circumstances inside room 809 of the Hôtel Dejavu, Paris. That man was Adham al-Sayid, Hamas's top missile engineer, whose death would unravel a story of espionage, betrayal, and international intrigue. The discovery was silent but chilling. No broken glass, no bullet wounds, only a cracked phone and a single coffee cup trembling on the nightstand. To French authorities, it looked like cardiac arrest. To Mossad, it was the quiet end of a long pursuit. For months, Israeli intelligence had hunted al-Sayid, the architect behind Hamas's long-range Raad rockets that reached deep into Israeli cities. He had vanished after the 2021 Gaza conflict, resurfacing under new identities across Turkey, Qatar, and finally, in the heart of Europe. Hotel cameras showed him returning to his room at 10:46 p.m., clutching a small leather briefcase. Inside that case, investigators later found encrypted schematics and a map of European supply routes, evidence that hinted he wasn't on vacation but on mission. When paramedics arrived, the scene felt wrong, untouched, unnervingly clean. His wristwatch had stopped at 10:58. A faint chemical trace lingered near the air vent. Someone had been there. Someone who left no prints, no footage, only finality. By sunrise, Mossad's encrypted line in Tel Aviv blinked once. The Falcon has landed. Mission complete. And just like that, one of Israel's most wanted targets was eliminated. Not by war, but by the quietest act of vengeance imaginable. But as dawn spread over Paris, questions began to rise faster than the sun. Who authorized this strike? How did Mossad operate under France's nose? And what unseen chain of betrayal brought Adham al-Sayid to his final breath in a Paris hotel? If you're fascinated by real-life spy stories, where assassins move in silence, governments deny, and the truth hides between the lines, you're in the right place. This story isn't fiction. It's a mosaic of shadows, strategy, and secrets that shaped global power. Tell us, which city are you watching from? Do you believe nations can kill for security and still claim morality? Like this video, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe, because this is just one page in the world's most secret war. But who was Adham al-Sayid? To the world, he was a ghost, a soft-spoken Palestinian engineer with no online footprint, no public photographs, and a passport that changed with every border crossed. Yet within Hamas, he was something far greater. Al-Sayid was the mind behind Hamas's advanced missile program, the man who turned improvised metal tubes into guided weapons capable of reaching Tel Aviv, Haifa, and beyond. Israel called him the architect of fire. His comrades called him the shield of Gaza. For years, he lived between laboratories and safe houses, building rockets from scraps, reverse engineering military tech, and evading every satellite and informant. To Mossad, he was not just a target. He was the symbol of an idea that refused to die. But after the 2021 Gaza conflict, whispers spread of internal leaks, that al-Sayid had grown ambitious, seeking alliances beyond Hamas's command. He was said to be negotiating new weapons deals across Europe, crossing invisible lines that even his handlers feared. For Israel, the stakes were clear. Every new missile meant new civilian graves. Eliminating al-Sayid wasn't revenge, it was prevention. For Hamas, his survival meant defiance, the continuation of a shadow war fought with steel, code, and silence. So when his body was found in Paris, the world's reaction split in two. Some saw justice, others murder. Yet beneath the politics lay a haunting question. How far will a nation go to defend itself? And what does it lose along the way? To understand that night in room 809, we must step back into the shifting sands of power, ideology, and fear that shaped the modern Middle East. Because no bullet is fired in isolation. Every trigger is pulled by history itself. It was the aftermath of the 2021 Gaza conflict, a brief but brutal war that left over 200 dead and an uneasy ceasefire hanging by threads of politics. Israel's intelligence services had emerged shaken but determined, haunted by the precision of Hamas's latest rocket volleys. For the first time, missiles built in Gaza's underground workshops had traveled farther, faster, and with deadlier accuracy. Behind that leap stood one man, Adham al-Sayid, whose genius was quietly rewriting the balance of regional deterrence. The Middle East, in that moment, was less a map and more a minefield. Iran's Revolutionary Guard supplied blueprints, Syria offered testing grounds, and Qatar bankrolled operations under humanitarian pretenses. Meanwhile, Israel faced mounting pressure from Washington to limit civilian casualties while still neutralizing Hamas's growing reach. Mossad, long accustomed to operating in the shadows, was tasked with a near-impossible dual mission: dismantle Hamas's foreign network without igniting an international scandal. Every success had to be invisible, every failure deniable. In Gaza, al-Sayid's reputation was mythic. He'd studied aerodynamics in Cairo, then vanished for years, resurfacing with knowledge that rivaled entire defense industries. Some claimed he was trained in Tehran, others whispered he'd been mentored by ex-Soviet engineers in Lebanon. Whatever the truth, his designs, the Raad, Fajr G, and the experimental Zulfikar 7, changed the battlefield. He built what Hamas had long dreamed of: a weapon that could reach central Israel before Iron Dome even blinked. Israel's leadership viewed that innovation as a red line. Prime ministerial briefings grew darker. Defense ministerial memos carried a single underlined phrase: preemptive neutralization. Intelligence units began mapping al-Sayid's movements with near-obsessive precision. The fear wasn't just rockets, it was the idea of independence. If Hamas no longer relied on Iranian imports, it could wage war indefinitely. That autonomy had to be crushed before it matured. Thus began Operation Blackhaven, the codename whispered in corridors from Tel Aviv to Brussels. But al-Sayid wasn't a man who stayed still. After the war, he slipped out of Gaza through smuggling tunnels, reportedly aided by a Turkish intelligence liaison. From Istanbul to Doha, he resurfaced under fake passports, meeting financiers and engineers in discreet cafes. European intelligence quietly monitored his trail, but none dared act. No one wanted Mossad's wrath, nor Hamas's revenge. And so, Europe became the neutral ground for a shadow conflict, where silence was currency and betrayal a daily trade. By late 2021, Mossad's European desk compiled a chilling report. Al-Sayid was negotiating missile guidance systems from a Balkan front company linked to black market arms dealers. The deal threatened to change the region's entire military geometry. It wasn't just about rockets. It was about control, leverage, and future wars that could leap borders before diplomacy could even react. For Israel's intelligence chiefs, this wasn't a target. It was a time bomb wearing a suit. In Tel Aviv, the decision crystallized. A kill order was drafted under the Keshet Protocol, reserved for threats classified as existential. The mission's success would rely not on brute force but on precision, misdirection, chemical delivery, and plausible deniability. Paris was chosen for one reason: distance. It allowed Mossad to act in plain sight, wrapped in the illusion of civility. The City of Lights would soon host one of the darkest operations ever conducted beyond the battlefield. Inside a reinforced operations room beneath Tel Aviv's intelligence complex, a handful of senior officers stared at live feeds and satellite overlays, while a single phrase pulsed on the secure screen: Keshet, immediate. The decision had not been impulsive. It followed months of intercepted communications, financial trails, and human source confirmations that together formed a lattice pointing only one way. Adham al-Sayid had moved from engineer to strategic enabler. The plan's authors were a hybrid team: Mossad's Counterproliferation Unit, a discrete branch of the Israeli Defense Forces Intelligence Corps, and a small legal advisory cell tasked with minimizing diplomatic fallout. Their mandate was surgical: neutralize the threat, preserve plausible deniability, and avoid any collateral political detonation in Europe. They rejected blunt force options early. A kinetic strike or public arrest would have splintered international opinion and risked civilian casualties. A cyber operation lacked permanence. Adversaries could patch and adapt. Instead, the operation favored subtlety, an extraction of capability rather than a spectacle. The chosen method combined covert surveillance, engineered exposure, and a chemical agent delivery calibrated to incapacitate without obvious forensic signatures. This approach allowed Mossad to claim deniability should the French government publicly probe the incident. In their calculus, invisibility was both shield and weapon. Technical preparation hinged on two pillars: intelligence fusion and bespoke tradecraft. Analysts cross-referenced travel manifests, hotel bookings, payment records, and signal intercepts to reconstruct al-Sayid's habits, his preferred cafes, couriers, and route between a rented sedan and his room. Photographs captured from a distance were enhanced by pattern recognition algorithms to confirm gait and build. Meanwhile, engineers in an off-site lab synthesized a delivery mechanism small enough to bypass hotel security, yet sophisticated enough to avoid detection by routine toxicology screens. The device was non-metallic, micro-dispersive, and designed to dissipate rapidly, leaving physiological effects that mimicked a sudden medical collapse. Logistics demanded local footprints that left no trace. Safe houses in an unremarkable arrondissement served as staging points. Cutouts, ordinary Europeans with clean records, posed as travel companions and bellhop contacts. Financial officers funneled tiny amounts through legitimate front companies to cover incidental expenses, while a parallel legal team rehearsed diplomatic scripts should Paris demand answers. The operation also relied on exploiting human routines: hotel staff schedules, garbage collection windows, and the weak points of CCTV coverage. Every entry and exit was timed to the minute, every contingency planned with fallback routes that could vanish like smoke. Secrecy was enforced by compartmentalization. Only operatives with need-to-know access received mission-critical data. Communications used ephemeral channels that self-erased after transmission. Field agents wore no service insignia and carried forged documents matching the fabricated identities. In training runs, operatives rehearsed motions in an exact replica of the hotel corridor, practicing the silent choreography of approach and disengagement until muscle memory replaced hesitation. Psychological preparation was equally rigorous. Operatives briefed on possible civilian encounters, escape improvisation, and the moral calculus of carrying out orders that would never be publicly acknowledged. Tension built in small, precise increments. Days before the operation, analysts noted a schedule shift. Al-Sayid extended his stay by a single night. That extension collapsed the window of opportunity. Patience turned into urgency. A weather report predicted heavy rains that could mask short-term movement but complicate exfiltration. Traffic updates altered planned routes. At each small inflection, commanders recalculated risk matrices, weighing the immediate intelligence value against the cost of delay. The mission's timing would hinge on a narrow convergence, the target's predictable routine, a quiet hotel floor, and a moment when external eyes were diverted. Throughout planning, legal and ethical debates simmered. Counselors argued over sovereignty and reciprocity. Could an act on French soil be justified under existential threat? Military analysts countered with hypothetical trajectories and casualty projections, illustrating how a single upgraded guidance system in the wrong hands might multiply civilian risk many times over. In the end, decision-makers accepted a grim arithmetic. An invisible strike in Paris would spare more lives than the alternatives. With the plan green-lighted, the team moved from preparation into execution. Each step, a quiet tightening of a noose that would either neutralize a looming danger or ignite a diplomatic storm. They moved like shadows folding into the city's ordinary rhythm. A taxi dropping off late-night diners, a couple arguing softly on the sidewalk, a street lamp flickering once and then steady. From a distance, nothing in the Hôtel de Louvre's facade betrayed the choreography inside. Quiet staff, a concierge polishing glass, and the dim hum of the HVAC. Yet below that calm, invisible lines of coordination clicked into place. At 22:30, surveillance teams took positions. Operators in plain clothes blended with late-night patrons. One sat reading a newspaper, another pretended to check a phone, their eyes flicking to the hotel's entrance with practiced casualness. Inside the hotel, an agent posing as a guest registered under a false name 3 doors down from room 809. Proximity without suspicion. Technical teams monitored the building's external cameras and the public corridor feeds, noting blind spots and the cadence of housekeeping rounds. Every movement had a timestamp, every timestamp a contingency. At 22:46, the man arrived, Adham al-Sayid, returning from an evening apparently spent in a nearby meeting. He walked with a measured gait, suitcase in tow, unaware that a mosaic of watchers had stitched his route into a map. He signed the register, climbed the stairs, and slipped into room 809. The door closed. Outside, ordinary Paris resumed. The distant clatter of a metro, a dog barking, the muffled laughter from a late-night cafe. 22:58. The window for action narrowed. The team waited for two converging signals, the corridor quiet for a full 5 minutes, and the hotel staff shift crossing away from that wing. Inside a van 2 blocks over, a mission controller counted down in a voice that was almost conversational. 3, 2, 1. The operatives who would enter were not soldiers in uniform, but professionals who had trained to make their presence feel like background noise. A coat dropped, a phone call feigned, a suitcase moved. 23:01. They entered. The approach was surgical, rehearsed to muscle memory. The door opened quietly, a whisper of fabric against brass. Within the room, the air smelled of cheap cologne and brewed coffee. The target sat at the small table, poring over documents, the lamp casting a thin cone of light over blueprints and a travel itinerary. For a breathless instant, their eyes met. There was no flourish, only the astonishing ordinariness of a man surprised into awareness. The room became a theater of tiny acts. A tray shifted, a glass set down, a chair nudged. The operatives moved with a courtesy designed to diffuse suspicion. Speak softly, keep the motion minimal, make the intrusion feel like an errand. All the while, the team's secure channels flickered, status updates, a single-word confirmation, a quiet rhythm of acknowledgement. Outside, distant traffic rose and fell like a tide, unaware of the human drama unfolding on the 9th floor. Moments later, because in operations the longest minutes feel like compressed hours, the target slumped, the smallness of the scene belying its gravity. Medical reality followed immediately. A pulse checked, a watch stopped at the same time on the bedside table, and the room's single lamp left to burn like an accusing eye. There was no gunshot, no loud disturbance. The outcome was delivered with a silence so total it seemed to press against the wallpaper. The exit was as important as the entrance. They left as quietly as they had come, retracing steps, returning the world to the shape it had occupied before their arrival. In the corridors, a broom continued its sweep. In the lobby, a receptionist continued the ledger. The operatives dispersed into the city's veins, a tram, a cab, a shadow melting into a crowd, their identities collapsing back into mundane anonymity. At 23:24 back in Tel Aviv, a single encrypted message arrived at a secure console. Falcon, down. The phrase carried the weight of finality without spectacle. For the architects of the operation, it meant a box checked off a list. For the analysts who had watched a threat evolve into danger, it meant a narrow reprieve for lives that might otherwise have been lost. For Paris, it meant a crime scene would soon appear in the formality of police tape and curious neighbors. In the hours that followed, the scene hardened into evidence. The chambermaid who found the body, the clinicians who recorded a cause of death that would spawn rumors, the diplomats who would prepare statements. But in that compressed hour between entry and exit, the operation had been executed with a professionalism that left no theatricality, only a stillness, a stopped watch, and the faint echo of decisions made in rooms far away. Whether it would be called justice, murder, or necessity depended on which side of history you stood. For the team that night, the mission's conclusion was a simple, cruelly precise fact. The threat had been neutralized. The next morning, headlines across continents framed the same scene in different languages. A discreet Parisian hotel corridor turned into a geopolitical fault line. French police cordoned off room 809, forensic tents fluttering under morning light, while diplomats in capitals scrambled to translate a crime into policy. In Tel Aviv, the mood was sober, relief stitched with unease, because the elimination of one engineer did not erase the networks that birthed him. An Israeli security official, speaking on background to sympathetic outlets, called the outcome a necessary blow to an emerging capability that endangered thousands. The phrasing was precise: avoid boastfulness, emphasize prevention. Government spokespeople insisted they would not comment on operational matters, but highlighted the pattern of cross-border threats that justified vigilance. For many Israelis, the news felt like a cold reassurance, a specialist removed before weapons could be fielded. Hamas's public reaction was immediate and incendiary. A terse statement mourned a martyr and vowed retribution in measured terms that blended grief with strategic restraint. An oath to avenge through resilience rather than rash escalation. Social feeds in Gaza filled with small altars, photos, candles, slogans, while operatives on various fronts switched into heightened alert, not necessarily for immediate retaliation, but to shore up cells and protect assets. France found itself in an awkward posture. Officials condemned any act of violence on French soil and pledged a full investigation. The Interior Ministry announced detentions for questioning, including 2 hotel employees and a courier linked to the victims' last known movements. French prosecutors said evidence would determine culpability. Diplomats urged calm, while legal teams prepared for a complex probe that would weigh criminal law against international intelligence practice. Across Europe, governments exchanged terse cables. Some expressed private relief at the removal of a dangerous actor. Publicly, most called for due process and restraint. Intelligence services quietly reviewed their cooperation agreements. How had al-Sayid moved across borders, and where had surveillance failed? For a continent that prized rule of law, the incident reopened old debates about the limits of covert action and the sanctity of national sovereignty. Media narratives split along ideological lines. Some framed the event as covert justice, a preemptive measure that saved lives. Others depicted it as extrajudicial killing, warning of diplomatic fallout and the erosion of legal norms. Opinion pieces argued whether states, even under existential threat, should operate as judge, jury, and invisible executioner. Talk shows turned the operation into moral theater. Callers and commentators argued until midnight, each convinced of the ethical clarity of their stance. Street-level reactions were visceral and local. In Tel Aviv, citizens paused on sidewalks, reading briefings with the weight of someone who has accepted perpetual insecurity. In Paris, neighbors speculated and shopped, keepers recounted late-night guests as if retelling the plot of a thriller. In Gaza, funerals and chants galvanized communities, while quieter rooms discussed strategy and mourning in equal measure. Diplomatic consequences rippled outward. France demanded explanations, yet tread carefully to avoid a public rupture with an ally that prized regional intelligence exchange. Regional players monitored the fallout, calculating gains and risks. For non-state actors, the message was raw. Technology and proximity matter, and exile is no longer sanctuary. By evening, the immediate frenzy had cooled into a grimmer, prolonged aftermath. Investigations, diplomatic notes, and murky claims would fill weeks to come. But the night's event, a single precise incursion into a hotel room, left a louder, more enduring outcome. A reminder that the boundaries between war and peace had blurred, and that in the modern shadow war, every city block could be a battlefield or a courtroom, depending on who held the camera and who told the story. Within days, the narrative around Adham al-Sayid's death began to splinter into competing versions, each claiming truth, each serving a different agenda. In the world of espionage, certainty is the first casualty, and Paris quickly became a stage for conflicting stories stitched together from half-facts and rumor. One version, circulated through security circles sympathetic to Israel, described a clean technical operation. A precision-delivered toxin deployed through the room's air conditioning vent, dissipating within minutes, leaving no residue. This account painted Mossad as clinical, almost scientific, an agency that preferred elegance over spectacle. Supporters pointed to the absence of collateral damage as proof of ethical restraint, a surgical strike in a world of blunt instruments. A second version emerged from within Hamas's own networks, darker and more chaotic. In this telling, al-Sayid had been betrayed, not by Mossad, but by his own inner circle. A financial dispute, perhaps, or ideological fissures between militants and political leaders. To them, His death was a purge disguised as foreign assassination, an internal housecleaning written off conveniently as Israeli handiwork. Conspiracies spread across encrypted chats, each thread contradicting the last, but all united by a common belief. The walls had ears, and no one was untouchable. A third explanation, whispered through European investigative journalists, suggested a hybrid theory. French and Israeli agencies, they said, had cooperated unofficially. The death was neither sanctioned nor rogue, but something in between. Intelligence opportunism executed under a fog of mutual deniability. This angle appealed to bureaucrats who lived by plausible ambiguity. It implied control where there might have been chaos. Academic analysts joined the fray, parsing chemical reports and behavioral data. Some argued that the physiological markers were inconsistent with known Mossad toxins, hinting at an improvised or borrowed method. Others countered that intelligence services constantly evolve. Today's weapon could be tomorrow's prototype, untraceable by design. The debates spilled into think tank panels and closed seminars where experts debated ethics over espresso. Meanwhile, the French inquiry dragged on. Officials released statements promising transparency, while quietly classifying most findings under national security clauses. Autopsy results remained sealed. Witnesses retracted earlier testimonies. CCTV footage from crucial hours mysteriously corrupted. In public, authorities condemned foreign interference. In private, they calculated diplomatic costs. The opacity itself became an answer, proof that something powerful had moved through Paris and left bureaucratic silence in its wake. For Hamas, myth-making took precedence over fact. Al-Sayid's image was printed on posters, his funeral broadcast through grainy streams, his name folded into chants about resilience. Every contradiction fed the legend. Whether he was murdered, poisoned, or sacrificed, he became a symbol, the scientist who dreamed of sovereignty through technology. The truth mattered less than the story's power to inspire. In Israel, officials maintained the ritual posture of denial. No comments, no leaks. Only a faint satisfaction that a file marked priority threat could now be archived. Yet even within Mossad, debates simmered. Had they struck a legitimate target or crossed an invisible moral frontier? In corridors where ethics rarely held sway, some officers still asked whether intelligence supremacy justified eroding the very laws they vowed to protect. As weeks turned into months, the competing narratives hardened like sediment. Historians would one day call it an operation, a mystery, or an execution, depending on their politics. The truth, layered beneath secrecy and propaganda, resisted excavation. And in that resistance lay the essence of modern espionage, the perpetual twilight where fact and fiction merge, and where every version of the story, however conflicting, serves its own strategic purpose. Militarily, the mission was perfect. Politically, it detonated like a silent grenade. In the narrow corridors of power from Tel Aviv to Brussels, Adham al-Sayid's death reshuffled alliances, reopened grudges, and reminded the world that Mossad's reach was not constrained by borders or treaties. The immediate strategic impact was tangible, a temporary paralysis within Hamas's missile program. Technical data went missing, suppliers froze shipments, and engineers retreated into deeper concealment. For months, Israel's southern skies were quiet, the launch sites in Gaza dormant. In Jerusalem, officials celebrated quietly. They framed the operation as deterrence made manifest, a message to adversaries that no laboratory or luxury suite offered immunity. The absence of further attacks became evidence that the signal had been received. Strategists pointed to metrics: intercepted communications showing panic, the collapse of coordination among Hamas's external procurement networks, and the halt of several missile testing initiatives. On paper, it was a flawless strategic return on risk. But victories in the shadows have costs measured differently. Within the intelligence community, senior officers warned that the operation's success might breed complacency. Striking an engineer was not the same as dismantling an ideology. Analysts feared a successor, younger, more ruthless, eager to avenge and outdo his mentor, would emerge from the ruins of secrecy. And beyond that, Europe had awakened to an uncomfortable realization. that covert warfare had migrated into its hotels, trains, and quiet suburbs. Diplomatically, fractures deepened. France demanded explanations, summoning Israeli envoys to clarify cooperation protocols. Publicly, both sides stressed friendship. Privately, trust frayed. European allies began tightening counter-espionage frameworks, not to protect Hamas but to safeguard sovereignty. Intelligence sharing slowed. Joint initiatives paused under bureaucratic review. What had once been discreet coordination against terrorism now carried the scent of manipulation. Paris, Berlin, and even London grew wary of operations that blurred legal lines under the banner of existential defense. In the broader Middle East, the message was parsed with care. Iran doubled down on missile support for proxy factions, portraying the killing as proof that Western soil was no longer neutral. Turkey issued cautious statements condemning extrajudicial actions yet privately intensified its own monitoring of exiled militants. Qatar, ever the mediator, sought to translate the tension into leverage, promising humanitarian investment in exchange for restraint. The geopolitical chessboard adjusted, pieces shifting almost imperceptibly, but the pattern unmistakable: deterrence for Israel, defiance for its foes, discomfort for Europe. Back in Tel Aviv, policy advisors turned the incident into doctrine. Internal memos coined the term precision deterrence abroad, the idea that threats could be removed anywhere, anytime, provided deniability remained intact. Military colleges would later study the operation as a model for low-signature counterproliferation. Yet moral philosophers within Israel's own security establishment questioned the precedent. Could a democracy sustain legitimacy while exporting its justice across borders unseen? Meanwhile, in Gaza's underground workshops, silence was not surrender. Fragments of al-Sayid's research circulated among disciples who treated his work as scripture. Within a year, prototypes reappeared, crude yet functional. Intelligence briefings began to whisper familiar warnings: new designs, unknown guidance tech, possibly derived from the old plans. The architect was gone, but his blueprints had survived, scattered, encrypted, reborn. In hindsight, the Paris hit was both a masterstroke and a seed. It bought time, yes, months of uneasy quiet along Israel's border, but also legitimized a new era of borderless reprisal. Governments took note, rival agencies adapted. The invisible war had matured, shedding its Cold War caution for modern audacity. And as analysts drew diagrams of cause and consequence, one truth crystallized. In the realm of covert strategy, every solution plants the roots of the next conflict. Years later, the events of that February night in Paris would harden into legend, a myth passed between intelligence officers, debated by historians, and dramatized in film. Within Mossad's corridors, the operation acquired an unofficial name whispered with a mix of pride and unease: the Louvre Directive. It became shorthand for a new kind of warfare. One fought not in deserts or alleys but in hotel rooms, embassies, and server farms. In Israeli military academies, instructors dissected the case as an example of asymmetric deterrence. Cadets studied the operation's flawless timing, its zero collateral footprint, and the calm efficiency of agents who erased a man without leaving fingerprints on diplomacy. Almost. The lesson was double-edged. Intelligence excellence can win the night, but lose the narrative. Publicly, Israel never acknowledged involvement, yet the global assumption of responsibility carried its own weight. Deniability preserved legality, not innocence. In the Palestinian territories, Adham al-Sayid's name transformed into folklore. To some, he became the martyr of Paris, a symbol of intellect punished by fear. Graffiti murals appeared in Rafah and Khan Yunis, blending his likeness with rocket silhouettes and verses about resistance through innovation. Songs and pamphlets elevated him to the pantheon of the fallen, proof in their telling that knowledge itself had become the enemy's greatest threat. Within Hamas, factions cited his death to justify both vengeance and reform, turning myth into motive. Culturally, the operation's ripples reached far beyond the region. Independent filmmakers adapted the story into thrillers set in glass-walled hotels and rain-slick streets. Novelists fictionalized it into tales of moral ambiguity, where agents wrestled with patriotism and conscience. Universities hosted conferences on ethics of transnational assassination, drawing legal theorists and security experts into debates that seldom found resolution. For most audiences, the truth remained a ghost, glimpsed through speculation, never fully seen. Within France, the case persisted as an unsolved mark on the Republic's record. Each new administration reopened the file briefly, then reclassified it under national security exemptions. Politicians invoked it when debating intelligence reforms. Journalists revisited it whenever foreign agents were caught elsewhere in Europe. The phrase Room 809 entered intelligence slang as a metaphor for an operation that everyone knows happened but no one can officially prove. Over time, Mossad veterans offered conflicting reflections. Some called the Louvre Directive a triumph of intellect over chaos, a surgical act that prevented greater wars. Others saw it as a moral fracture point, the moment when necessity began to resemble habit. Retired officers warned that every perfect operation teaches the next generation the wrong lesson, that control can replace accountability, that precision can excuse trespass. By the late 2020s, both Israeli and Palestinian institutions quietly referenced the event as a turning point. Hamas restructured its engineering units into smaller, decentralized cells to prevent similar vulnerabilities. Israel, learning the same lesson from the opposite angle, intensified its investment in AI-driven intelligence to reduce human exposure. The operation that began as a single assassination had evolved into a doctrine and a cautionary tale. Today, the death of Adham al-Sayid exists between truth and legend, between necessity and regret. His face adorns murals and classified slides alike, each telling a different story. To his enemies, he was a danger neutralized. To his followers, a visionary silenced. And to historians still piecing together that quiet night in Paris, he remains the question itself. What happens when nations learn to kill with precision, but forget to grieve with proportion? So what truly changed that night in Paris? On paper, a single name vanished from an intelligence watch list, but in reality the event reshaped the invisible architecture of modern conflict. Mossad proved that deterrence could travel first class, that a nation could strike without warning and still wake up to silence. Yet silence is deceptive. It doesn't end stories, it buries them. In the months that followed, France tightened its domestic intelligence cooperation, while quietly expanding surveillance of foreign agents. Israel's policymakers cited the operation as validation of preemptive doctrine. And in Gaza, a new generation of engineers worked by candlelight, convinced that every innovation demanded martyrdom. The mission had achieved its objective, but it also deepened the narrative divide. One side claimed defense, the other destiny. Philosophers of statecraft now debate the cost of invisible justice. Does security bought through silence strengthen nations or hollow them from within? Can morality survive when accountability is encrypted? Each covert triumph leaves behind an echo, a moral residue that governments cannot classify away. The question lingers in every diplomatic meeting, in every encrypted message sent before dawn. How many invisible victories can a democracy sustain before it forgets the sound of conscience? Today, Room 809 stands as both symbol and warning. The bed replaced, the carpet cleaned, the walls repainted, yet the air of that night clings to the story like static. Tourists walk past unaware, while intelligence officers, somewhere far away, study the operation's precision as an academic exercise. For the world, it remains an unsolved crime. For those who planned it, perhaps an unfinished chapter. History's ledger will decide whether it was a necessary act or a quiet trespass into the soul of sovereignty. The question isn't whether Mossad won that night, it's whether humanity lost something greater. If this story fascinated you, subscribe and turn on the bell. We're just getting started. More unseen wars, hidden betrayals, and stories history tried to erase await in the shadows.